This is our third tutorial for our two-part geode mold. In this one I'm using eye candy pigments, which are beautiful rich colors. I chose Yamagata red for the red, Periwinkle purple, and Shogun yellow because I felt that these colors would blend well together. This mold is about 8.25 inches wide, and you get a finished tray that's about 8 inches wide by 1 inch tall. And with this, the yellow area that you see in the mold is what we call the river, and it's a removable part. The islands are what I'm going to be pouring first with these beautiful deep colors. I started with the red, and I had no preconceived notion of how to pour this. I just knew I wanted the colors to blend on their own, which they do quite beautifully. For the red, I ended up using 4 scoops and about 2.5 ounces of resin. For the purple, I used 5 scoops and about 2.5 ounces of resin. And the yellow, I used 4 scoops and 2.35 ounces of resin. You basically only need about 6.5 ounces to fill these island areas. I had made a little extra, so I just put the leftover stuff into another project. As you see here, I put the red down and then the yellow and the purple, and the red is kind of overtaking it. I'm using the heat gun to kind of move the colors around, but I wasn't quite sure if this was the way I wanted to go, so I decided to pour the colors in a different order, starting with purple, then adding the yellow with the red on top. These colors all do move on their own accord, so there was no controlling them. I kept this whole pouring process so you could see the different combinations I did, how I added to them, added more to them, changed the colors around, and eventually used the heat torch to move the colors at the end. It's fun using this mold because that river area just stays separated from the rest of it. So when you pull it out, you have a totally clean area to pour into. Here I'm trying yellow on top of the purple, and then I'll add some red. These aren't very large areas. You could use a pipette if you wanted, but I didn't feel it was necessary for these island areas. I do use the pipette later in the river area. This mold in total, like I said, it takes about 6.5 ounces to fill these island areas. The river is about 2.5 ounces. That's the yellow part of the mold. And then if you're going to do a top coat, it's about 7 ounces for a top coat. And there is room on top of this to pour a top coat so you don't have to end up going over the edges. As you see, I'm still doing different color combinations. I'll have to go back on top of that red and add something. I knew I didn't want an all red tray. I did want a blend of all of these colors. You can't go wrong with eye candy pigments because they stay true to color, don't change into muddy colors, and as you can see, the colors are just popping. I've seen so many people struggle doing geode agate trays using toilet paper rolls or making dividers out of glue that we were like, let's create a mold that works properly. And that's where we came up with this. So now I've got all the spaces filled and I'm just taking my little spoon to go spoon in little areas, adding color where needed, like some yellow on top of the purple, some purple on top of the red. It does look like a mess right now, like a kindergarten classroom, but it does turn out beautiful in the end. As the resin gets thicker with the mica in it, it's a little harder to move, and I guess I could have gone in here with a toothpick to move the colors around, but I didn't think of that at that time. I did use a silicone tool to pop bubbles if I saw any. Just adding a little bit more purple into that red to cut down on the red. I do like the way all these colors are showing up though. where to add more red. Trying to get away from the red, and I just add more into another area. Once I'm done playing around with the colors, it takes approximately a day for our resin. I think I used JDiction 1-to-1 resin on this. I'm using the heat gun here to move the colors a little bit, although they are getting thicker as the resin's getting more set up. It does take normal drying time before you can move on to the next step. Another thing that's cool about this mold is it's a top-up mold, so this is what you're going to get. You're not wondering what it's going to come out like on the bottom because it's a top-up pour. So once I'm done with the heat gun, I leave it to set till the next day. The air really does move those colors around great. So now it's the next day and the resin's set up and I'm removing the river part of the mold. Some color will seep through, not all the time. I think when Kevin pours in this mold, he puts clear on the bottom. Doesn't ruin anything because that's the bottom and no one will see it. So it doesn't matter if any extraneous color ended up down there. For the river part, I knew I wanted a darker purple, but I still wanted to stay in the same family. So I took the Periwinkle purple again, and I used 4 scoops, and I added Black Pearl by Art Pro, because I didn't have Black Mica from Eye Candy at the time. And those are just tiny little scoops, but as you see, the black made the purple a little bit deeper, which would be perfect to set up off these brighter colors. I have 2 pipettes sitting in there. One's pulling in resin while I'm piping the other. And as you see, I'm just taking it in between all the island areas. If you have a steady hand, which I don't, you could take a small cup and pour in these areas. But since I'm prone to making a mess, I try and alleviate making a mess as much as I can. As you see what I'm doing, when I pull up a pipette that's full of product, I pour it out, but meanwhile the second one is sitting in there just drawing in product. So one's always ready to go. So I'm just carefully filling in the little areas, the river areas. Once I add a little bit more, you'll see how the colors start to pop with this darker purple around them. It is a longer process. I cut quite a few minutes out of this video just trying to speed it up and cut it up here so you didn't have to watch 20 minutes of me piping. That's what's great about doing voiceovers later. But as you see, it's covering up that bottom area. Don't have much problems with bubbles because you're putting it in such small little areas. You can take, again, a toothpick or a silicone tool and just kind of move it around those areas to make sure there are no bubbles. But since it'll be under a top coat, you won't see it anyway, if there were a couple. Getting ready to finish up the river area here. I always end up fiddling around with resin pours much more than I show here. I'm always poking and prodding and adding something more. On one part of this, I think I did pull back the edge a little bit, just to make sure I got the resin in there on the sides. And here's the last little river area. The one thing we've noticed, the resin doesn't really flow in between, maybe because the mold is flat, which you need the pipette to get it moving into those areas. And for some reason, it always ends up going off camera while I'm working, probably because I'm fidgeting with it so much. And at the end here, if I got a little resin on the top island areas, I just took a Q-tip with some rubbing alcohol on it and cleaned it up. So now it's the next day, and it's ready for the top coat. I just grabbed 7 ounces of clear resin, and I poured it slow just to make sure it would go into all the little nooks and crannies. You could probably pour it faster as well, and just use a heat gun or a torch to pop any bubbles. But again, you don't get very many bubbles, and this is a top-up pour, so you see exactly what you're getting. Finishing off the little areas there, making sure all of it's coated with resin. I did put a Tupperware over this while it was drying, so there was no extraneous dust or anything that could fall on the top of it. And again, this was a 7-ounce top coat. 6.5 ounces for the bottom, 2.5 for the river, and about 7 for the top. So, no big surprise here, demolding it, this is what it looks like. The colors blended beautifully. You can have a peek at the bottom. It's kind of fun looking in a different way. It looks like Flintstones. We ended up painting the sides purple, sides and the bottom purple, and adding wooden feet. And we turned this into a Geode Agate vanity tray. And here comes the finished photos of them. I think it turned out beautiful. The colors just blend. That deep purple makes the red and the yellows pop. And as you'll see here, this is how it would look sitting on your dresser.